3-1. The haunted house calls. Jenny had been babysitting for a few years now, and she had seen her fair share of weird situations, but nothing could have prepared her for the night she babysat the Williams children. The Williams family lived in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, a place that always seemed a bit eerie to Jenny. It was a stormy Friday night when she arrived at the house. Mr. and Mrs. Williams were heading to a charity event and would be back late. As she stepped inside, the wooden floors creaked under her feet, and the dimly lit hallway gave off an unsettling vibe. The children, Sam and Lily, were already in their pajamas and ready for bed. After a quick dinner, Jenny tucked them in and settled down in the living room with a book. The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows. Jenny tried to ignore the growing sense of unease that seemed to permeate the house. Suddenly, she heard a loud thump from upstairs. She froze, listening intently. Another thump followed, then silence. Thinking it was the children, she went upstairs to check on them. Sam and Lily were sound asleep, undisturbed by the noise. Jenny shrugged it off, blaming the old house and the storm. She returned to her book, but couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The living room felt colder, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. A sudden, loud bang from the kitchen made her jump. She grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made her way to the kitchen. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see a figure standing in the shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest as she called out, "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. Summoning her courage, Jenny pushed the door open. The kitchen was empty, but the back door was wide open, letting in the cold wind. She quickly shut and locked it, trying to calm her racing heart. As she turned to leave, she saw muddy footprints leading from the back door to the hallway. They were too large to be from the children. Panic set in as she realized someone had been in the house. She called the police, who arrived within minutes. They searched the house thoroughly but found no one. The officers assured her it was probably a homeless person seeking shelter from the storm and left. Trying to calm down, Jenny returned to the living room. She picked up her book, but her hands were trembling too much to read. The house was deathly quiet, except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Suddenly, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned around, but no one was there. The feeling of being watched intensified. She glanced at the mirror on the wall and gasped. A shadowy figure stood behind her reflection, staring at her with hollow eyes. She spun around, but the room was empty. Her breath came in short gasps as she tried to make sense of what she had seen. Desperate to leave, Jenny decided to stay in the children's room until their parents returned. She grabbed a chair and sat by their bedside, watching over them. The minutes dragged on, and the storm outside raged on. Then she heard whispering. It was soft at first, then grew louder. She couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was coming from the walls. She checked on the children. They were still sound asleep. The whispering turned into a low, menacing growl. Jenny's blood ran cold. She held onto the flashlight, her only source of comfort. The growling stopped, replaced by a chilling laugh. It echoed the room, sending shivers down her spine. She felt a cold breath on her neck and heard a voice whisper, "Get out." She bolted from the room, running down the stairs and out the front door. She waited in her car until Mr. and Mrs. Williams returned. And they found her shaking and pale, unable to explain what had happened. She refused to go back inside and quickly left after they arrived. Jenny never babysat for the Williams family again, and she never told anyone about the horror she experienced that night. The old house stood silent, its secrets hidden within its creaky walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting babysitter. Story 2. The basement terror. Megan had always been a responsible and diligent babysitter, trusted by many families in her neighborhood. When the Johnsons asked her to watch their kids one Saturday night, she gladly accepted. Your Johnsons lived in a large old house with a notoriously creepy basement that the kids were always warned to stay away from. The night started off uneventfully. After playing games and watching a movie, Megan led the kids, Jake and Emma, to bed. She settled down in the living room to finish some homework. The quiet of the house only interrupted by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Around midnight, Megan heard a strange noise coming from the basement. It sounded like something scraping against the walls. Remembering the Johnsons' warnings, she was hesitant to investigate, but decided to check just to be sure everything was all right. She grabbed a flashlight and carefully opened the basement door. The basement stairs creaked under her weight as she descended. The air grew colder, and a musty smell filled her nostrils. The scraping noise grew louder, echoing through the dark space. She shone her flashlight around, revealing old furniture and boxes covered in dust. Then she saw a large old wardrobe standing in the corner, its door slightly ajar. The scraping noise was coming from inside. Megan's heart pounded as she approached the wardrobe. She hesitated, then reached out and pulled the doors open. Inside was a small, dusty mirror and an old, tattered coat, but there was no sign of anything that could have made the noise. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. She screamed and dropped the flashlight, the beam flickering as it hit the floor. Panicked, she scrambled to pick it up. As she did, she heard a low, growling noise coming from the shadows. Megan shone the flashlight around the room, saw nothing. The growling grew louder, more menacing. She backed up against the wall, her breath coming in short gasps. She could feel a cold presence closing in on her. First, the flashlight flickered and went out, leaving her in complete darkness. And she heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. Terrified, she pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay silent. The footsteps stopped right in front of her. She could feel the icy breath of whatever was there, but she couldn't see it. Then she heard a whisper, "Leave now or suffer." Megan bolted for the stairs, stumbling in the dark. She reached the top and threw the door open, slamming it shut behind her. She locked it and leaned against it, trying to calm her racing heart. She could still hear the growling and scraping from the other side. Determined to keep the kids safe, she checked on Jake and Emma. They were sound asleep, oblivious to the terror below. Megan decided to stay in their room until the Johnsons returned. She sat in the corner, clutching the flashlight, her eyes never leaving the door. When the Johnsons came home, they found Megan pale and shaking, unable to explain what had happened. She insisted on leaving immediately and refused to ever babysit there again. The Johnsons were puzzled but respected her wishes. Years later, Megan learned that the house had a dark history. The previous owners had a son who had gone missing, and his body was never found. Some said his spirit haunted the basement, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to enter. Megan never forgot the terror she felt that night, and the basement remained a place of nightmares in her memory. So, the unknown caller, Anna had babysat for the Thompson family many times before and never had any issues. They were a kind family with 2 young children, Alex and Sophie, who were well behaved and easy to manage. One Friday night, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were attending a dinner party, leaving Anna in charge. The evening started off peacefully. Anna played games with the kids, read them the bedtime story, and tucked them in. With the children asleep, she settled down in the living room with her homework. The house was quiet, the only sound being the ticking of the clock on the wall. Around 10 p.m., the phone rang. Anna answered, expecting it to be the Thompsons checking in. Instead, there was only silence on the other end. She hung up, assuming it was a wrong number. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, she heard breathing, but no response. Chilled, she hung up again. The phone rang a third time. Anna picked up, her voice trembling as she said, "Hello?" A deep, distorted voice responded, "Have you checked on the children?" Her blood ran cold. She hung up and rushed upstairs to check on Alex and Sophie. They were sound asleep, undisturbed, trying to calm down. Anna returned to the living room, but the phone calls continued. Each time the same question was asked. "Have you checked on the children?" Terrified, she called the police, who advised her to stay calm and assured her they were sending an officer over. Calls persisted, each one more menacing than the last. Anna locked all the doors and windows, her heart pounding with fear. The last call she received before the police arrived was different. The voice said, "I'm already inside." Panic surged through her. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen and hid in the children's room, her back against the door. The house was eerily silent, save for the sound of her own rapid breathing. Minutes felt like hours as she waited for the police to arrive. Finally, she heard the sound of sirens and then a knock on the door. The police entered and searched the house thoroughly. They found no sign of an intruder, but the phone calls had come from inside the house. The police discovered that an old phone line connected to the basement had been tapped into. Anna was shaken but relieved that the children were safe. The Thompsons returned home. Horrified by what had happened, they thanked Anna for her bravery and promised to have the phone line removed and the locks changed. Anna never babysat for the Thompsons again, and the memory of that night haunted her for years. She could never forget the terror of those phone calls and the chilling realization that someone had been watching her from within the house.